Victorian England was an age of gaslit streets, whispered secrets, and scientific ambition with no moral limits. Behind velvet curtains and medical theatres, human lives were often reduced to experiments. Some stories were buried to protect reputations. Others were hidden because the truth was too disturbing to face. Tonight, we uncover one such forgotten nightmare. They came into the world under flickering lamplight, in a cramped Victorian home where fear filled the air long before their first cries were heard. The birth of the Gofitz Conjoined Twins was not announced with joy, but with shock and dread. Midwives froze, whispers replaced prayers, and the room seemed to shrink as the truth revealed itself. Two infants bound together by a shared anatomy, breathing as one fragile existence. In an era where physical difference was seen as a curse or divine punishment, their arrival was immediately marked as unnatural. The family stood helpless, torn between love and terror, knowing that news of such a birth could ruin reputations, invite public scrutiny, or worse, attract the attention of men who called themselves healers but often behaved like predators in the name of science. Word spread quickly, as it always did in Victorian society, where secrets had a way of slipping through cracked doors and servant gossip. Physicians arrived not out of compassion, but curiosity. They examined the twins with cold precision, measuring limbs, tracing shared organs, and recording details as if documenting an object rather than two living souls. Their birth was spoken of in hushed tones at medical gatherings, described as a rare opportunity, a phenomenon that could elevate careers and fill journals. The twins were not yet named in these discussions. They were referred to as specimens, cases, marvels of abnormal development. From their very first days, their identities were stripped away and replaced with clinical language that denied their humanity. Victorian society thrived on spectacle, and the birth of the Gofitz twins existed at the dangerous intersection of science and entertainment. While the public pretended to be horrified by such abnormalities, private fascination burned intensely. Newspapers hinted at their existence without revealing too much, fueling morbid curiosity. Medical men debated whether they should be hidden away or displayed for study. To some, their birth was proof of nature's cruelty. To others, it was a gift, a living puzzle waiting to be solved. The twins' family found themselves trapped, pressured by authorities who claimed to know what was best, while also fearing the judgment of a society that punished difference with isolation and shame. As the twins grew stronger, their bodies became symbols rather than beings. Doctors argued over theories: maternal imagination, divine warning, evolutionary error, each explanation reflecting more about Victorian fears than scientific truth. Their shared body was mapped and remapped, sketches drawn, notes revised, as if understanding them anatomically would somehow justify their existence. No one asked what it felt like to grow up bound to another heartbeat, to never experience solitude, to sense the world through constant physical presence. Instead, their birth was framed as a challenge to be conquered, a problem to be fixed, ignoring the quiet reality of two children learning to breathe, cry, and survive in a world already hostile to their form. From the moment of their birth, the Gofitz Conjoined Twins were no longer just children of flesh and blood. They became symbols of Victorian obsession. Their arrival marked the beginning of a life lived under observation, where every movement invited scrutiny and every breath was measured for meaning. The night they were born would echo through medical halls and whispered conversations for years, shaping decisions that would be made without their consent, sealing a fate determined not by love or empathy but by fascination, ambition, and fear. The men who surrounded the Gofitz Conjoined Twins wore polished coats and carried leather-bound notebooks, presenting themselves as guardians of progress, yet their eyes betrayed something far colder. In Victorian medicine, curiosity often masqueraded as virtue, and compassion was treated as an obstacle rather than a duty. Doctors spoke of advancement, of discovery, of leaving a mark on history, while quietly abandoning the idea that patients were human beings capable of fear and pain. The twins were not approached with gentleness, but with the hunger of men who believed that knowledge justified any cost. Every examination became an intrusion, every touch an assertion of authority, as if their bodies belonged not to themselves but to science itself. Medical theatres became places of quiet horror, where whispers echoed louder than screams. The twins were discussed as possibilities: what could be learned, what could be attempted, what boundaries could be tested. Physicians debated separation with excitement, not dread, calculating risks on paper while ignoring the terror such words inspired in living hearts. Victorian doctors often believed suffering was necessary, even noble, if it served progress. Pain was reframed as contribution, trauma as sacrifice. In this mindset, the twins' discomfort was irrelevant, their fear inconvenient. What mattered was whether their bodies could reveal secrets that single bodies could not. Secrets that would elevate reputations and secure legacies. The obsession with experimentation grew stronger as the twins became better known within medical circles. Case notes multiplied, sketches were refined, measurements repeated endlessly as if numbers could replace empathy. Doctors competed subtly, each wanting to be the one who understood the twins most completely, who dared what others hesitated to attempt. Procedures were suggested not because they were necessary, but because they were possible. Ethical boundaries were blurred, then erased, under the belief that extraordinary bodies required extraordinary measures. The twins' shared anatomy became a challenge, a puzzle to solve, rather than a reality to respect. What made Victorian medical obsession especially terrifying was its confidence. These men truly believed they were right. Moral doubt was dismissed as weakness, emotional hesitation labeled unscientific. When concerns were raised about the twins' suffering, they were silenced with claims of future benefit, of lives that might one day be saved because of what was learned now. The twins were turned into living justifications, their pain transformed into currency for progress. In private conversations, doctors spoke openly about limits they wished to push, about experiments that would never be approved today, all while maintaining an outward image of professionalism and restraint. In this world, the Gofitz Conjoined Twins existed not as children, but as opportunities. Their lives were shaped by decisions made in rooms they were never allowed to enter, by hands that valued discovery more than dignity. The white coats that surrounded them were symbols not of care, but of control, and the pursuit of knowledge slowly eclipsed the basic human responsibility to do no harm. As word of the Gofitz Conjoined Twins spread beyond medical circles, their existence became something to be carefully managed, controlled, and concealed from the public eye. Victorian society was deeply conflicted when it came to physical difference, torn between moral outrage and morbid fascination. Officials and physicians debated whether the twins should remain hidden to preserve decency or revealed under strict supervision to satisfy curiosity. Behind this debate lay a darker motive: control over how the twins were seen, spoken about, and ultimately remembered. Their lives unfolded behind closed doors, in private rooms and institutional corridors, where secrecy offered protection not for them, but for those who wished to dictate their narrative. Despite the careful restrictions, whispers of exhibition followed them like a shadow. In an era when human oddities were displayed in traveling shows and private salons, the line between scientific demonstration and public spectacle was dangerously thin. Some doctors argued that controlled exhibitions would educate the public, while others saw financial and professional opportunity. The twins' bodies were discussed in terms of presentation, lighting, angles, and distance, as though they were artifacts rather than living beings. Even when they were not openly displayed, the idea of exhibition shaped their existence, influencing how they were dressed, positioned, and moved, always with the awareness that unseen eyes were eager to observe. Life behind closed doors did not mean safety. Privacy was an illusion, interrupted constantly by examinations, consultations, and visits from curious professionals. The twins grew up surrounded by adults who spoke over them rather than to them, deciding their routines, diets, and movements as if they were incapable of agency. Their shared body made independence impossible, yet it was the imposed isolation that truly confined them. Windows were covered, visitors restricted, and moments of normal childhood were replaced by silence and surveillance. Their laughter, if it existed, was never recorded. Their fear, when it surfaced, was dismissed as weakness or misunderstanding. Public narratives about the twins were carefully crafted, stripped of discomfort and emotional truth. When information was released, it was filtered through language that softened cruelty and disguised intrusion. Newspapers hinted at their condition with vague fascination, while medical journals praised restraint and professionalism. Missing from every account were the twins' voices, their personal experiences erased in favor of anatomical description. The public consumed a version of the story that maintained the illusion of ethical progress, unaware of the emotional cost hidden behind institutional walls. Within this controlled existence, the twins learned that their lives were not their own. Every step was supervised, every interaction measured for risk, not to their well-being, but to public reaction and professional reputation. Their world was shaped by fear of scandal and hunger for admiration, creating a reality where secrecy became routine and exhibition remained an ever-present threat, blurring the boundary between protection and imprisonment. Within the walls of 19th-century medical institutions, ethics were often spoken of but rarely practiced. These buildings, praised as temples of progress, concealed corridors where suffering was normalized and conscience was conveniently forgotten. Victorian hospitals and research facilities operated under rigid hierarchies, granting immense power to senior physicians while silencing patients entirely. Consent was an unfamiliar concept, especially for those deemed abnormal, poor, or powerless. The Gofitz Conjoined Twins existed at the very bottom of this structure, where decisions were made without explanation and procedures carried out without permission. What happened behind those doors was justified through authority, wrapped in scientific language that excused actions which today would be considered unforgivable. Doctors were trained to detach emotion from practice, believing empathy weakened judgment. This detachment created an environment where human pain became background noise. In institutional settings, suffering was recorded clinically, reduced to symptoms and outcomes, stripped of emotional reality. If a patient cried, it was noted as agitation. If they resisted, it was described as non-compliance. The twins' fear and distress were translated into data points, their reactions interpreted not as suffering, but as responses worth studying. Ethical discomfort was buried beneath professional pride, and any moral hesitation was dismissed as ignorance or superstition. The institutions rewarded results, not restraint, creating a culture where pushing limits was encouraged and compassion quietly discouraged. Behind locked wards and restricted rooms, experimental practices thrived in secrecy. Procedures were attempted simply because the opportunity existed, not because they were necessary or humane. Anomalous bodies like those of the Gofitz twins were seen as rare chances, unlikely to be repeated, and therefore too valuable to waste. Institutional oversight was minimal, often non-existent, allowing physicians to act with near-total autonomy. Failures were hidden, complications quietly managed, and suffering reframed as unavoidable risk. These institutions protected their own, prioritizing reputation over responsibility, ensuring that mistakes never reached public awareness. Patients within these systems were rarely viewed as individuals. They were categorized, labeled, and filed away, becoming part of a growing archive of medical curiosity. The twins' shared body challenged conventional understanding, making them particularly vulnerable to institutional abuse. Their humanity complicated the science, so it was ignored. Nurses followed orders without question, assistants learned silence as survival, and administrators focused on prestige and funding. The institutional machine moved forward, fueled by ambition and protected by secrecy, leaving no space for ethical reflection or moral accountability. What made these horrors endure was the belief that they were necessary. Progress demanded sacrifice, and institutions decided who would be offered up without ever asking. The suffering of the vulnerable became an accepted cost, hidden behind walls thick enough to muffle cries and routines designed to appear orderly. Within these spaces, the line between healing and harm dissolved, and the lives entrusted to medicine were reshaped by fear, control, and an unwavering belief that science must move forward no matter who was left behind. The story of the Gofitz Conjoined Twins did not end with their lives. It lingered in the shadows of history, quietly shaping how medicine remembered itself while carefully forgetting its victims. Victorian society moved forward, celebrating progress and innovation, yet the cost of that progress was rarely acknowledged. Records were archived, journals preserved, and names of prominent physicians immortalized, while the twins were reduced to footnotes and case numbers. Their suffering was absorbed into the narrative of advancement, transformed into evidence of bravery and intellect rather than pain endured. History favored those who held the pen, not those who lay on the examination tables. As decades passed, the language surrounding such cases softened, disguising cruelty beneath technical terminology. Words like experiment observation, and anomaly replaced the raw reality of fear and trauma. Medical education inherited these stories stripped of emotion, presented as lessons rather than warnings. Students learned what was attempted, what failed, and what succeeded, without ever confronting the human cost behind each discovery. The twins' legacy was reshaped into something palatable, something useful, ensuring that discomfort did not interrupt admiration for the past. In this way, silence became tradition, and forgetting became institutional habit. Public memory proved equally selective. Victorian fascination with medical marvels faded, replaced by modern confidence in ethical oversight and patient rights. Yet the foundations of these reforms were built upon stories like that of the Gofitz twins, even if their names were never spoken. Their lives became invisible scaffolding, supporting a system that refused to acknowledge them. Museums displayed instruments without context, textbooks praised innovation without accountability, and history marched on, convinced it had outgrown its cruelty while quietly standing on its remains. For those who uncover such stories today, the legacy is unsettling. The twins force us to confront uncomfortable questions about progress and morality, about how easily humanity can be sacrificed when ambition is rewarded. Their erased voices echo through time, challenging the idea that history naturally improves itself. They remind us that ethical standards are not inevitable, but fought for, often after irreversible harm has already been done. Remembering them means acknowledging that suffering was not accidental but systematic, woven into the fabric of institutions once trusted without question. The haunting truth of the Gofitz Conjoined Twins lies not only in what was done to them, but in how easily the world moved on afterward. Their story exposes the fragile boundary between advancement and abuse, showing how quickly compassion can vanish when curiosity takes control. Long after the gaslights dimmed and Victorian halls fell silent, the consequences of that era remained embedded in modern medicine, leaving behind a legacy written not in ink alone, but in lives forever altered and voices history chose not to hear.